Sorry, I'm just gonna plug in my.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, the municipal elections are just over, but I found that a son of a gentleman I thought very highly of ran in the Toronto municipal elections, and I thought I'd reach out to him because one of the challenges we've got is not a lot of young people this gentleman's age really are interested in politics and let alone voting, number one, but then actually getting out and running for politics. So I thought it'd be interesting to check in with Evan Sambasivam and find out why he ran. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So tell me, where did you run to start with and for what position?
I ran for city councillor in Ward 8, Eglinton Lawrence, down here in Toronto.
And why'd you run?
Very good question. I never really thought politics would be on my immediate career horizon. I was working in the mental health sector for a while. I really enjoyed enacting social policy on the nonprofit side of the coin. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, I lost one of my oldest friends to complications of chronic homelessness and mental health. Just already working in the sector, that hit me pretty hard, and I really felt like I needed to do more than I was already doing to create change on the issue because I felt helpless as is. A lot of the change that needs to happen around chronic homelessness is at the municipal level, whether it's supportive housing, whether it's integrating social programs with our healthcare system. The municipal government directs quite a bit of that. And I found that in order to see the change that I believe needed to happen, I needed to roll up my sleeves and actually get the job done at the city level.
What was the experience like?
It was surreal.
Surreal, really surreal. Okay, tell us about it.
Yeah, well, there's not really a handbook that describes what it's like for you to upend your career for campaigning 6 months, planning it 2 years. The toll it takes on you, the hours you're working every day. The self-promotion was quite unusual because that wasn't really a factor in my career before. And it's all self-directed. You're not working a 9 to 5. You're going out there as many hours in the day as there is sunlight, and you are talking to as many voters as you can, try to excite them on an issue that you already care about, but also understand their issues as well. You can talk to other people that have done it before. You can read as many books as you want. You can read strategy, but this job is like no other.
Now, Eglinton Lawrence is Mike Cole. Mike's been around for politics for quite a long time. How did you think you were going to unseat an incumbent like that?
It wasn't about the odds. It was never about the odds because I always knew he'd been in power for quite a long time. He was a former cabinet minister. He was well known. If I thought about the odds and the opportunity was my only drive, I wouldn't have done it. It was about the necessity of moving the needle in Eglinton Lawrence. And I did think it was possible. You have to think it was possible if you give up that much. But at the end of the day, the reason I did it was because he has been in power for 40 years. And while I didn't win, that fact is still true. We desperately need change in Eglinton Lawrence. We need a councillor that understands the affordability crisis. We need a councillor that shows empathy towards the less fortunate and people struggling with homelessness, to new immigrants. And I hope that he reflects on the campaign I ran and what we were able to do at a grassroots level and bring some of that to city council. And I'd be happy to chat with him about it. But at the end of the day, I ran because there were things we needed to see on city council that weren't there. Odds just out of the question.
Now, tell everyone sort of approximately where Eglinton Lawrence is. Center of the city, the north end of...
Pretty much right in the center of the city. So the boundaries are southeast would be Yonge and Eglinton, which obviously has its own challenges right now with the crosstown maybe being completed next year. And it goes all the way west to the Barrie Go line, just west of Caledonia. And then the north boundary would be the Highway 401. So it's quite large. It has a bunch of different communities. It's divided right in the middle by the Allen. Very interesting. And I thought canvassing all these different communities was quite interesting because you probably have 6 or 7 different unique demographics within the ward that you have to consider with each of your decisions.
I wouldn't have thought of Eglinton Lawrence as one of the ones that would have been more focused on housing.
Yeah, there's two worlds in Eglinton Lawrence. So I'm from the east side, kind of closer to Yonge Street to Avenue, and a lot of people there are taken care of. You have a lot of people that work on Bay Street, a lot of people that have owned their home for quite a long time and are not worried about their personal ability to afford a home, but they may be worried about their kids. Again, it's the area I grew up in, and I feel quite lucky. At the same time, I'm not sure my prospects of owning a home in Toronto in my lifetime are great. You have to be quite wealthy unless you're getting a gift from your parents to buy into Toronto's housing market. And then there are part of Eglinton Lawrence that are not as well off. There are a lot of people living in socialized housing, community housing, uh, low rental housing, and they might be living week to week, month to month. A lot of them are living only off of the ODSP shelter allowance, which is about $500 for a single person. That's terrifyingly low, and they would love to be able to access the housing market, let alone being able to rent and not worry about next week's food or next week's paycheck. So that doesn't exist in Eglinton Lawrence. But one thing that I found talking to people is large groups of people in Eglinton Lawrence have felt disenfranchised because they've been promised the world and it's been under-delivered, or politicians don't even go there at all. So the political discourse in Eglinton Lawrence is quite distorted.
Quite distorted because what? Because they've been promised and nothing's happened? Is that what you're saying?
That's part of it. And then there are areas that are over canvassed as well. I find that my area is quite well represented at all levels of government. The residents, organizations that represent my immediate neighborhood have a direct line to the city council, to the MP, to the MPP, and whatever you feel about that specific representative, you can get a hold of them quite easily. That's not always true for every community. Sometimes you see the politicians show up just for the photo ops, and when the chips are down, they're nowhere to be seen.
So, as part of the problem where people vote, turnout is so low in any election, let alone in a municipal election where it was really low. And I guess the area that you're describing between Avenue Road and Yonge Street is reasonably well-to-do, and so therefore on average, and homeownership is probably high, and so therefore on average, those people probably turn out at the polls a lot more, and so therefore our councillors, our politicians, oriented toward responding to people that vote.
Absolutely, it's part of the political calculus, and I totally understand that you have limited resources and you have to win. That's the game, but it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're responding to the people that vote more, they're likely to see the fruits of voting much more clear, and they're going to vote again. If you're ignoring people that vote less, they're going to feel ignored, like they're not a part of the process, like nothing they do matters, and that depresses turnout in and of itself. It's a vicious cycle. It requires structural change. It requires, in the 4 years you're not campaigning, but actually governing, to going out into these communities and showing that they are still constituents, they still matter, and they still should have a vote, whether they exercised it in the last election or not, whether they exercised it for you or not. For responsible community building requires doing the tough outreach that might not be as fruitful in order to make sure that our community is as strong as possible.
Now, many people think Mike Cole's not going to run again. Are you going to run in 4 years?
We will see. It's really tough to just say, yes, I'll run in 4 years. And then, maybe life changes. I'm 26 years old. I'll be 30 then. Will I have a family? Will I have a kid? Do they want me out on the campaign trail when I should be looking after what really matters? I cannot promise anything in 4 years. I would also be lying if I said, nope, that's it, I'm done. You don't put that much into a campaign and say, that's it, that was my one shot. It's on the table, and I want to keep working in the community. I want to do as much as I can to make Eglinton Lawrence a better place. And if down the line that means running, I'm open to it. But I also want people to know that if I don't run again, it's not because I gave up. It's because I found something that makes me happy.
We're chatting tonight with a gentleman that ran in Eglinton Lawrence in the Toronto municipal election, Evan Sambasivam. He was up against an incumbent, a pretty experienced gentleman, but he put up a very good fight. And I really want to take a step back after the break and ask Evan, how can we get other young people interested in politics, whether it's just turning out to vote or getting involved in the political process, or in fact, even running, which is something Evan had the guts to do, which a lot of people don't. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. The topic tonight is really youth in politics, or young people in politics. My guest is Evan Sambasivam. He ran in the City of Toronto municipal election that we just had in an interesting ward, Eglinton Lawrence, that I think has some of the richest neighborhoods in the city along Yonge Street and Avenue Road. People make jokes about the North Toronto moms and some of those very expensive private schools in the area, but then also near the Allen, the west side of the ward, some less prosperous areas. Let me say that. And then, as you mentioned, along along Eglinton, some issues probably from a municipal standpoint that are really extreme in regards to the impact that the Eglinton Crosstown has had. That seems to be going on in construction for, has it been a decade or more? I'm not sure. But let me take a step back, Evan, if I could. Turnout in municipal elections, in all political elections, are low, but in municipal particularly so. Particularly in your age group, which is unbelievably low. What do we do to get people like you, your age group, your age cohort, more involved in politics? Or is it a lost cause?
I think we have to first understand why people weren't showing up to the polls. It was bad in the provincial election. It was unfathomable in the municipal election. 29% is not acceptable, and we really need to be shaking our heads at that. People are exhausted from the last 2.5 years. I didn't want to believe it. Going into the provincial election, I had it in my head, we've gone through hell and back. We need to do a lot of reflecting on what we want our governments to do when the time comes for them to act. And people stayed home. And I think people have only a certain amount of capacity to care. And so we saw that exhaust at the election where people didn't want to engage with politics. We saw it even more so at the municipal level. And I think it was compounded by the fact that there wasn't a competitive mayor's race. In Eglinton Lawrence, John Tory saw some of his highest margins. And I'll say that didn't really help bringing my voters out to the poll. And then there's that self-fulfilling prophecy where people think that this election is a lost cause or a foregone conclusion. So why are they going to come out and vote in a process that they've been told by the media for months is predetermined? I think we are at an unnatural low right now. We've never had municipal turnout below 30%. Even last time at 41% was considered a historic low at the time. So I really have to believe that we won't see these numbers again, but we also do have to show something. We have to show people a reason to come out. One of the questions that I found the toughest to answer at the door is, why are you any different than any politician that comes here, promises me things, and then doesn't deliver? A lot of people have seen their politicians, their representatives, as I mentioned earlier, promise the world and then disappear and underdeliver. We need to show that government does matter. Government does affect your day-to-day lives. If you use transit, you should care about municipal politics. If you have kids, you should care about education. These things that are basic to a lot of people are not always top of mind and in everyday rhetoric when we're talking to each other. Like, not everyone thinks that politics is fundamental to their societies. A lot of people think it's nebulous, that's abstract, the voting is optional. And yeah, we really need to change the way we frame it. Go ahead.
Let me push you on that if I could. So I haven't seen statistics for the City of Toronto municipal election, but I did see statistics for, I guess it was 2 federal elections ago that had a turnout that was somewhere in the 50% or so range. But it was 80% for the people over the age of 65 and 20% for the people under the age of 30. And so if, anything like that extrapolates to the municipal election with your current low turnout that was below 30%, that's got to be like 10% of the people your age group that are turning out, and probably 60 to 70% of people my age group, which means that the people that have already built their net worth, have already owned their house, are the ones that are voting. And the people like you that are just starting out aren't voting. But politics should be helping people like you. How come we can't get people your age involved? And I understand that you had this story about this experience, not a story, this incredible experience about your friend being impacted by homelessness. Does it take that kind of personal connection? Or is there some way of motivating young people to vote?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there's kind of a vicious cycle here where a lot of young people are worried about so many things, whether it's their ability to live in Toronto, whether it's their personal finances, that sometimes the act of voting or keeping up with politics seems like secondary to their immediate concerns. The irony being that if they participated in politics, they could elect a government that represents them and is actually working out for those interests that they are worried about. So it is a communication thing. But yeah, I've been in the advocacy space, the youth advocacy space in particular, for a long time. And I know how difficult it is to get young people to do anything. There are bright young leaders out there, and I count them as my peers. And there are people that are quite good at motivating young people to act on specific causes. Like, young people do care a lot about things like climate change and things that are very clearly going to impact them in their lifetime and beyond. It is politics for some reason that seems to be a lot more difficult. It's a larger, messier system that traditionally hasn't worked with young people. It's quite unusual to see someone my age making a serious kick at the can in politics. I did not win, which extends it further that people don't think that politics is a young person's game, despite the fact that the world that politicians are creating right now, people my age are going to be reaping that. So, yeah.
Is there more interest in federal or provincial politics for people your age?
Yeah, well, I think that's true across the board, where people vote more in federal, provincial, municipal. It's easier to keep track of federal politics. It's in international news from time to time. Provincial politics shouldn't be in international news, although it is right now. And municipal politics is just far too much for an average person to keep note of what's going on at the kind of the smallest level, for lack of a better word. But when you think about what people interact with and what services people use, people are using the TTC far more than they're impacted by foreign policy. Or a pipeline in Alberta probably matters less to you than a pothole in front of your house. So thinking about it that way, we probably should be engaging more at the local levels of policy that affect an individual's specific life on a day-to-day basis than the larger, more nebulous, more ideological things that happen at the federal level. But that's not the case.
Mike Cole, I think, was quoted as saying there was something like 57 or 67 development applications in his ward right now. One of the big issues is not just affordability for people that are living on the streets, but affordability generally with lack of housing supply. And you're probably well aware of this province of Ontario proposal that came out last week in regards to trying to increase affordability by increasing supply and restricting city councilors' ability to have that NIMBYism impact on development. What do you think about that whole issue?
Yeah, so I will talk about the 50 to 60 development applications, because he has used that number before. What he knows and also won't mention is that many of those applications are going to be dead in the water with interest rates rising and the rising cost of building housing. There might be that many applications, but many of them will never see a shovel in the ground because they are now too expensive to build, despite the numbers that would have originally been planned for prior to the pandemic or even in 2020. So Eglinton Lawrence, frankly, can see a lot more development than it has right now. And that does seem like a lot of numbers. But when we look at the actual housing that's been built in Eglinton Lawrence in the last 4 years, or is likely to be built, it's still not looking great. Uh, yeah, I do like that the provincial government is taking housing seriously. They did promise to do so. I'm glad to see they're putting their money where their mouth is. The bill is an omnibus bill, so it's hard to speak about it in broad strokes. I think there's good in there. I think there's uh, some things that worry me in there. Uh, and on a rhetoric level, the thing that worries me the most is that this bill does no help in conflating the need for new housing with the need for sprawl. In Toronto, for example, you cannot sprawl. We're locked in.
Sprawled out.
Pardon?
You're sprawled out.
Yeah, that's it. There's no more green space to occupy. So we need to be focusing on larger buildings, on infill, uh, reducing legislation that mandates single family homes for no reason at all. Those are the kinds of solutions that I wish that uh, were the focus of this bill. I know that the reduction of the green belt is a legitimate concern. And I don't think new housing needs to be coming at the expense of wetlands or farmlands. I am glad that they are taking housing seriously, and I hope that this bill is not the final form and that we can go back and forth a little bit and work towards something that meets our more ideal needs. But I do think municipalities need to be pushed, because if we look at what the cities would do without the government using the carrot and the stick, we're not going to be creating enough housing for the new people coming in.
Well, particularly for people your age, I think that it's an issue. I think new people coming in, social housing, unbelievable issue, but it's an issue for everybody. Where we've got housing as a percentage of income, house prices to rents, whatever. Where we're at a all-time extreme in debt. At an all-time extreme, driven somewhat because of low interest rates, no question. But CMHC Housing says only 15-20% of the impact is because of low interest rates, even though that's the perception, that the vast majority of the impact is because of municipalities being slow in approvals and being very restrictive in approvals and height, et cetera. And so I do think that your one comment about sort of extra housing, some people refer to it as the missing middle, this as of right ability to take a single family home in anywhere. I think in the current legislation, it's anywhere close to transit, but convert that into 3 or 4 homes. In other words, put in a basement suite, a laneway house, a granny suite, whatever you want to call it, is one of the keys. And people like living in those denser, more urban environments. And some of the areas along Eglinton, Yonge Street, Avenue Road are like that. Your proximity of homes to each other is probably a lot closer than it is here in Mississauga, where you've got the wide swaths of big, huge grassy lawns. Evan, when I was your age, you'll probably be surprised to hear this, I was David Peterson's youth chair. David Peterson ran for the leader of the Liberal Party and was successful ultimately in ending 40 years of conservative ownership of the provincial government. And he did it with a couple of things. I think he did it, number one, in cooperation with the NDP. He did it with his red tie that gave him a logo that was at the time, kind of interesting and distinguished him. He did it with some backing of some money, but he did it with a really good progressive agenda and a lot of people behind him. And even with all that, he only, it took cooperation with the NDP to get him into government. I understand you're related to David Peterson. What do you think? Is there any analogy from that to what you need to do today if you're going to win?
Yeah, so I am lucky enough to count David Peterson as my uncle, and as such, he's been a mentor for me throughout my lifetime. I really tried throughout the campaign to make it clear I was running on my own merits. I didn't hide from my family, of course, but I am lucky to have incredible people. I can just call in for advice at a time like this. It's very different what we were doing. I'm running a very, very local micro campaign. Uh, my uncle was young when he ran, but he wasn't 26, and he was running for the leadership and ultimately to be the leader of our province. Uh, I was looking to create micro change, well, not micro change, but change on very five specific local issues. Um, I don't think right now is the time for me to be leading a province or even running for mayor or anything like that. So I think the scale of what we were trying to do is quite different, and the coalitions we would need to build were quite different. Uh, I was working more with community leaders, people who ran volunteer groups in Eglinton, Lawrence, advocacy groups for bike safety or road safety. But yeah, so
But when you think about running again, yes or no, David Peterson ran a few times as MPP, and he ran a few times as leader. And he built up his name awareness over time and his support base over time. And it didn't happen all at once. And even when it did happen, as I mentioned, it took cooperation and collaboration for it to happen. And so I guess what I'm driving at is, young man, I think you've got a great future ahead of you. Don't stop after one. Once you build or start building name awareness and start building those connections and start building that attitude within people's minds of, hey, this is a guy that can fight for change. It could take 4 or 8 years, but it's worth the investment of time. And it was for David, and he changed Ontario. And so I think we're going to be hearing from you again, young man.
thank you. Really appreciate that. Yeah, definitely proud of what we were able to do on this campaign. Wasn't the outcome I wanted, but I don't regret it for a second. And there was a lot of value we were able to create.
I wish there were more young men like you and your young females like you that put their hat in the ring and gave it a shot, because that's what we need to get people excited about politics, interested in politics, political conversation, getting out and voting. And not all of you will be successful, but some of you will. And more importantly, as I suggested, over time, you'll end up creating that movement that will end up being successful, not right away. So many people think they're going to win the first time. The vast majority of people don't win the first time they put their hat in the ring. Anyway, Evan Sambasivam, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your time.
We're going to take a break and come back with another politician in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody.